Chapter 5. Milo set up a second camp chair for Gwen. She hadn't arrived yet, but it would be easier than her unpacking and repacking all of her stuff. He laid a fuzzy fleece blanket over it. It was barely 5 p.m. and was already freezing out, which was par for the course in the high country, but that just made him try a little harder to make sure Gwen would be comfortable. He got up and started to adjust his telescope. Hello. Gwen was much earlier than he expected. He was happy to see her excited for the night. So, this was the ravine that was threatening to swallow me up last night. You're right, it's pretty deep. I never would have seen that. Milo smiled up at her, surprised that his pulse kicked up a notch. She looked like a pack mule going off to base camp. He dropped what he was doing and walked over to her. She had several canvas bags in her hands, as well as her large tote and her camp chair over her shoulder. Just how long are you planning on staying here? Milo asked, as both his eyebrows shot up. He did love to tease her. There were very few people in his life that he could do that with. The bags are dinner. I stopped at Midge's on the way and got us some food. Not that it will be anywhere near as good as lunch, but I figured it was my turn. You brought me dinner. He stared at the bags he was now holding. How did you know what to get? Midge helped me out on that one. She says you're quite predictable. I told her that I personally didn't believe that at all. She said a spinach salad would make you happy, so that's what's in there. And the other bag is from the grocery store. I noticed the fire pit last night, so I figured I'd bring everything we needed for s'mores for dessert. She held up a bag of marshmallows triumphantly. I've never had s'mores before. Are they hard to make? Gwen stared at him, dumbfounded. You've never made s'mores? Like, ever? What did you do when you went camping as a child? We lived in New York City. Camping wasn't really a thing. Well, we mostly lived in cities too, but s'mores are an essential summertime treat. Oh, I can hardly wait to make these with you. Milo loved the way her eyes shone when she got excited about something, like she was lighting up from within. Okay, dinner first. He gestured to her chair and her big fuzzy blanket. Oh, thank you so much. That was really thoughtful of you. I figured it would be easier to get us back to the truck on our way to off the trail tonight if you didn't have to pack up equipment. You're going to take me back to the hotel again tonight? Yes. Why are you doing that? I'm pretty sure I can find my way. Well, it worked out so well last night, I assumed we'd just do it all again. It makes sense to try and repeat the things that succeed. He conveniently left off the fact that he would drive her anywhere at all to get to spend more time with her. Looking into her eyes grounded him in a way that he had never felt before. But some things were better left unsaid. She grinned at his genuine excitement at his spinach salad. Midge had not steered her wrong. Milo pulled out the first thermos of coffee and poured 2 cups. He was very much looking forward to this night. With dinner cleaned up and put away, Gwen pulled out the marshmallows, graham crackers, and chocolate bars. She had clearly been waiting to introduce Milo to s'mores all evening. As the darkness fell and the sky lit up with an amazing star show, she got to work. That looks like a lot of sugar, Milo said doubtfully. He didn't usually eat dessert, and he hoped the treat was going to live up to her description. He was really bad at pretending to like things. But for her, He had already decided he would give it a try. Don't worry, it's not overly sweet as you're eating it. That's why it's so easy to eat, more. Get it? She snapped 2 full graham crackers in half and laid them out on a tray, sitting a piece of smooth chocolate on top of each half. Milo marveled at how even corny jokes sounded cute when she told them. He took the stick she offered him and held it steady as Gwen stuck a marshmallow at the end of it. He watched her in the light of the campfire. It almost made a halo around her brown waves as they hung down around her shoulders. She looked up at him and smiled. Yeah, he could pretty much stay here for the rest of his life. You have to toast the marshmallow, silly. Oh, he seemed to have forgotten that little detail. Apparently, the view had been too distracting. Once the marshmallows were sufficiently gooey, Gwen showed him how to free them from their toasting sticks and make a pretty damn good s'more. The marshmallow goo got all over the graham crackers, their hands, and even somehow her blanket. It's messy, but it's so worth it. What do you think? That may be one of the best things I've ever tasted. It's sweet, but it's totally worth it. He wasn't lying. He had finished his entire s'more and was now setting up a second marshmallow on his stick. Gwen's satisfied, content look made him warm inside. He felt his heart starting to untie the knots of doubt and hurt. He shook his head, trying to get back into the present and listening to the question she was asking. So how did a kid from New York City wind up at NASA studying the universe? I told you, I was always fascinated by what wonders might be out there. The world is so big and so wide, and we've barely scratched the surface. The first time I heard Carl Sagan talk about how we're tied to faraway universes, I was hooked. How old were you when you got hooked? Probably about 9 or 10. I'll always remember watching PBS and hearing him say it. The nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies were made in the interiors of collapsing stars. We are made of star stuff. I still get chills, even now. That is pretty powerful, she agreed. It's always amazed me how all the building blocks of life come together. I look at it happening inside a person, you look at it happening in the universe around us. Same book, different chapter. I don't suppose I've ever thought of it like that. Well, look at you, broadening your horizons. You should thank me, really. She was teasing him now. The corners of his mouth turned upward. He hadn't smiled this much in a long time. I do thank you, Dr. Taylor. It's been a long time since I've had such good conversation with someone. It's like you know exactly where I'm going, usually before I even get there. Gwen felt herself starting to breathe a little faster, and the blush crept up into her cheeks. Only she could get physically turned on by a hot guy talking about good conversation. Oh well, there were worse things, she supposed. For the entire weekend, she'd been trying to keep it together and not fall too head over heels for the handsome and charming Milo Gray. Now she wondered what would happen if they gave it a shot. They clearly had life in common, and she had never felt so at home with anyone before. She was sure he would never go for it. Still, she found herself wondering what it would feel like to stand in his space with his arms around her, breathing in his air. Gwen looked at her watch. 11:30 and still no northern lights. To say she was disappointed was an understatement. She readjusted her position in her chair, pulled her blanket tightly around herself and tried to put on an air of patience that she didn't really possess. Fidgeting around isn't going to make the aurora borealis show up any quicker. Milo was looking through his telescope, but he could still see her shifting in her seat every 30 seconds. He tried to sympathize with her. I want to see them too, but they'll show up when they show up, not a minute sooner. I have a good feeling about tonight. You're that optimistic about it. She was glad he was optimistic about something, at least. Yes, all the conditions are right. This is going to happen. Maybe if he said it with enough conviction, he could will it to happen. He clearly didn't want her to be disappointed again. Glaring at me isn't going to speed things up either. He saw that got a tiny grin from her. She got up and wandered over to his telescope. What are you looking at? Just some constellations that are looking particularly bright tonight. Plus, keeping an eye out for the start of the aurora borealis. No way, it's going to slip past you, huh? There are ways to see it just as it starts, kind of like an early warning system. It's easier to see that with a telescope. Gwen shivered. Milo repositioned himself to shield her from the wind. He looked into the telescope again, and then once more. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The slight hint of yellow that was emerging was not what he was expecting, but he was pretty sure it was what they'd both been waiting for. She was starting back to her chair. Milo reached out and grabbed her mittened hand to stop her. I think you're going to want to look up right about now. Why? I don't see anything. Patience, my dear Dr. Taylor. Patience, it's coming. Just as he finished chastising her about being patient, she started to see a small tail of yellow between the stars. It made a loop and danced across the black night sky. Oh. Milo interpreted her speechlessness as a good thing. I thought they were green. Gwen's voice came out as a hoarse whisper, like she didn't want to upset the delicate beauty that was playing out before them. Color depends on a lot of things. Green is most common. But you can see yellows, pinks, reds, blues. It really just depends what kinds of gas particles decide to explode in the sun's atmosphere tonight. Oh, look. She pointed at a wide streak of green that lit up the sky. She took a step closer to him, so she was leaning up against him. Milo put his arm around her to steady her. When he looked down at her, he could see she was crying under all her winter layers. He reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. She stood, mesmerized at the show in the sky. I never expected the movement. All the pictures you see are so static, like they light up the sky, and that's it, but it's not like that at all. It's like they're dancing, chasing each other. I don't think I've ever seen anything as amazing. Well, I can think of a few more amazing things. Gwen was mostly staring up at the sky, so she didn't notice that he was mostly staring at her. They stood there together, watching the explosive meeting between the gaseous particles from the Earth's upper atmosphere and the charged particles from the Sun's atmosphere. Two worlds colliding, making something unbelievably beautiful in the process.